So my first question, how do you think that we will solve some of those external problems, by climate change, biodiversity?
I suppose there are many ways that those things could change, but I guess for myself and for many others, the critical thing is that we actually change in the way that creates a better world in total. And that for me involves thinking of solutions that have equity built into them. So solutions that are focused on climate justice and equity as part of sustainability. What is also interesting is that there is a real crossover between those solutions that do have climate justice agendas and equity built into them are often more sustainable in their style simply because of their equity foundation. For example, the commitment to land ownership by women, particularly in less developed countries, ensures that more sustainable food growth and land management is established. Typically, when women take over land, they make their crops available to the village, the families, and they have a more sustainable style. When we have programs that educate women and girls, we have a reduced birth rate without any coercion. And this has been shown to have a massive effect on humanity's footprint. So many of the climate justice agenda solutions are highly effective in climate. What I also think is really important is what we were just talking about, is this whole idea that big solutions are the answer and that corporations have those answers and have the power and money to access those solutions. And although certainly big solutions are needed and need to be part of the solution, to exclude and to minimise the effect of collective and numerous global small solutions is to dismiss a really powerful arm that can contribute to climate change solutions and sustainability. So, for example, a small project that might fund sustainable menstrual pads so that girls can go to school and maintain jobs and hopefully become leaders in certain arenas. A huge equity move has a huge impact on what landfill has achieved and how many children they all have. So these solutions are highly effective, and yet they might come from a very small focus in a particular area.
Yes, I think you're right. It's that heroics, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And do you think, also you talked about in your answers is our own limited attitudes, that those sort of internal, and I guess we're seeing it in Australia at the moment, that sort of patriarchy and that ingrained misogyny that, we've moved away from the politeness of years gone by, especially in Parliament, and taken some relish in banter that is really misogynistic and I would hate to see what happens to people with intersectional personality. If you're female, black and disabled in Parliament, you're not there.
Absolutely. Well, the STEM Cup, I shared on that one, which was women of colour are not in STEM, in reduced numbers. And I think that's just highlights that whole kind of, I love the way that Fabian was saying, you've got to see the problem. And in a way, what's good about what's happening in Australia at the moment is that the problem is incredibly visible to not just feminists, but to, the ordinary mother, even the ordinary bloke in the street is going, my God, there's sort of people who are decent in some way are shocked by what is happening here. So common decency is being confronted, I think, and
there's a desire to sort of understand, because I think some of it is just so unconscious.
Mm-hmm.
There seems to be a desire from a section of men who pride themselves on their inclusivity and the way that they operate in the workplace to really understand what unconscious bias
absolutely
they do have.
There is a real need for education. What I feel is just so important here is that we've got the we're talking about the environment. That is, for me, that's just the most important thing. If we don't have that respect for the earth, how can I put it? It is an organic mother to us. It feeds us. It keeps us alive. And if we don't actually have that respect and maintenance and care of it and appreciation of it, we're doomed. It's that simple. And yet it's so intricately tied up with an attitude of how we treat anyone else. It's a bit like if we treat the earth as though it doesn't matter, we can treat someone else like they don't matter. And so it's this inherent attitude of not respecting all life in a way that is at the root of inequities and at the root of the environmental kind of crisis we're in.
Do you think we've lost our place in the ecosystem? We are part of that circle of life, that we're just another animal in the jungle. Do you think we've lost our place there?
I think as far as the ecosystem is concerned, we're very much part of it, unfortunately, hence our devastating effects on it. I think for many of us in many of our cultures, not all cultures, I think some cultures have retained that sense of things. But certainly, speaking for my own culture, I think it's quite hard to consciously connect back into that very critical relationship that we're in. It is critical at the moment. Yeah.
You said in your written answers, how important the environment, that Mother Nature was, and that sort of push for equality, diversity and inclusion.
I feel they're intricately linked. And what I've sort of gained from the conference on the Commission on the Status of Women is there's now quite a lot of research to support the fact that equity solutions are linked to sustainability, not just in attitude, as in an attitude that fosters sustainability is the same attitude that fosters equity. If we're not thinking of quick solutions, if we're thinking of, in our cultural style, of the heroic quick fix, then we haven't changed any attitude. We're just going, let's fix this problem with a lot of money and a lot of power. But if we actually commit truly to the idea of sustainability, not just plugging a greenhouse gas emission problem or a fossil fuel problem, but if we actually commit to the idea of sustainability, the principle of sustainability as an ethic, as a way of life, then equity is very much tied in with that in an attitudinal sense, because sustainability is about respecting that there are limits, respecting that we share, respecting that there is concern for how other species are doing, how the forest is doing. There's a sense of not conquering and dominating, but living within something that is greater than ourselves.
That's beautiful. It's like talking to Jane Goodall. Goodness me.
I can relax.
I've just been editing a piece. Jane Goodall was one of the filmed faculty, and we have a very long piece that they show usually on the ship down in Antarctica when Jane talks about all manner of things that in the world, but we've edited it down to about, I think it's about three or 4 minutes. So I'm going to start sharing it out to the community in the next couple of weeks. She very much talks about exactly the same things, that tapestry of life that all needs to be woven together, and how important, women and diversity and different ideas and collaboration is in, overcoming the problems that our planet faces. And just that pursuit of money has destroyed any sense that we have of being part of a world. Yeah, it's interesting. Great minds.
What I find exciting is that concept of ethic, which in a sense one has the option as a human being to choose what ethics one lives by. And that concept of that ethic, which I personally value, and obviously many of us do, it is an ethic that we all subscribe to. This is what Homeward Bound's about. But that so much research is coming out now to show that when that ethic is actually lived by, we actually are creating climate solutions. That is what's so wonderful. And the climate justice movement, particularly the feminist action for climate justice movement, is very committed to linking that data up so that our cultural structures that are so committed to outcomes rather than to living by an ethic, but show us the money, is it going to work? Fair enough. We want solutions that work at this stage. We don't want to puddle around in ideas. But the fact that they're actually able to present that kind of more concretized data rather than just talk about the ethic of living. When I was working with Greenpeace, and I was on my first trip, and I was young and I was very optimistic, and I was given obviously the job as the medic, and as the medic, I was a deckhand, and I got to have to do my shifts, and so it was Captain John was on the Rainbow Warrior at the time, and I would be working with him in the midnight to 4 o'clock shift, which was a terrible shift because you did 12 to 4 in night, and then you got 12 to 4 in the middle of the day. So you sort of felt like you had 2 days in every one day. You had these short naps. Anyway, you can skip all that. Don't bother putting it in the, this is just rubbish, okay? But this is the story, okay? And to keep ourselves awake at night, it was in the days where, you listen to radio, and he would have cassette tapes of radio shows that he had listened to, and he'd bring up a different issue every night. And in retrospect, I know what he was doing. I was this young kid that was kind of, well, not super young, but I was this young one who was all bluey-eyed about Greenpeace, and he'd bring up issues and we'd talk about those. And he said to me one night, as we're staring out into the dark, the black sea and the black sky, this small little thing, a little boat going along, and he said, do you think we're going to make it? And I said, oh yeah, absolutely. There's all my friends are, we've got no worries. He said, I'm not so sure. And I felt this sort of drop, and he said, I'm not so sure. And he said, but what matters is what side of the ship you're standing on when it goes down. And it meant a lot to me, because it was like, it wasn't about creating an outcome. It was about living a life that had integrity and value and ethic. And yes, the fact that those living that life can create the solution we need is very empowering. But I live it not to create the solution. I live it because it's the way to live.
It's amazing. What a piece of, what a way to think and live. And it's without people on that right side of the boat, there is no hope, is there?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Now, can you tell me your story about going to prison?
Yeah, it's interesting.
Is it a story that you want to share, or?
Yeah, very happy to. Oddly enough, it was one of the most special experiences of my life. It didn't feel like that at the time, though it became something very special, not because of what it was to other people, but what it was in terms of the internal experience. So it was an ordinary day in the life of a Greenpeace boat. We were in the Baltic Sea, and there was a law where if you dumped oil into the Baltic Sea, you got a fine. But if you had an accident and spilt oil, there was no fine. It's a bit like if you run into a car, no problems if you didn't mean to do it. So ships, in terms of getting rid of their old engine oil and so forth, would just go out into the middle of the sea and dump it and then say, sorry, we had a spill, it wasn't our fault, we didn't mean to do it. And this happened repeatedly. And there was one ship called the Fagervik, and the Fagervik had done this repeatedly, and there was a court case where we almost nailed the Fagervik, or Greenpeace almost nailed the Fagervik, but it got out by some court ruling. Okay, so it was in our sights, and so we find it out at sea. We take up the little Zodiacs, and some of the rock climbers put up their ropes onto the deck, and they climb up. And in Greenpeace style, which I so respect, I have so much respect for that organisation. There's no violence, there's no aggression. We simply have a letter that we wish to take to the captain, and the letter is asking for a response. And we will stay on board. Well, I wasn't on board at that point. The rock climbers, the climbers up, said, and we will stay on board until we have a response from you. And it's basically challenging what actually did happen when you dumped that oil on the 13th of March or whatever it was. And, of course, no response comes. The captain doesn't quite know how to respond to this letter, and no response comes. So they say, well, we're happy to stay till the response comes. And so we pull into port and we follow the ship in. And, of course, as happens, nothing can actually happen. There's no unloading or offloading allowed while there are unauthorised people on board. So we basically shut the ship down and we chain ourselves to the boat. So we do this in rosters, and at one point someone came and said, people are tired, we need to have new people. So on I went and chained myself to the boat, which is what you do, until we get a response from the ship company. And at some point, the police have come along and sawn through the chain and put us into prison. What was unfortunate was that the Göteborg shootings were the year before, and we were in a small provincial town. And they immediately labelled us as terrorists. So on board Greenpeace, we get a briefing by the lawyer, and the lawyer said maximum crime would be break and entry, and that'll be 6 months in prison. And I thought to myself, I can do 6 months in prison. That's fine. I can do that. And again, why, you might ask? Because I love this place. Yeah. So, yes, I could do 6 months in prison. However, when they get into the cells, I'm aware of something's not quite right. I'm supposed to have access to my Greenpeace lawyer, beautiful Jan, who I'm still in contact with in Sweden, and he's wonderful wife who was also incredibly supportive, his wife at the time, who was incredibly supportive. But I wasn't allowed to ring. I thought, oh, that's funny. I was told I'd be allowed to ring my lawyer. I was told I'd be held indefinitely. I could be held indefinitely without a trial. So we have the same terrorist legislation here in Australia. If I think someone's a terrorist, they can be held indefinitely without trial. So I thought, something's not gone quite right here. And my anxiety rose. We were in a cell the size of a small bathroom. It had a mattress on the floor, and there was some feces and blood still around in the cell. And being a doctor, I was aware of HIV and Hep C, being in this population of people who inhabit these places. So I asked if I could clean it up, and of course I wasn't allowed to. And, no one, when I called, no one came to the cell. I was cold. Everything's taken off you. I was cold. I couldn't have a blanket. There was a level of, it was just Sweden, it wasn't terrible, but there was a level of hardship that was being obviously consciously directed towards us. And this went on for several days. And then one day a jailer came up to me and he said, "You're from Greenpeace, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "I love what you do. Every day they keep you in, I will give another $20 to Greenpeace." I went, wow, this is working. It started to change after that. We had a preliminary trial that was picked up by the police car, taken to the court. The police turned around and said to me as I got out of the car, good luck. I hope you win. I could start to feel the support. I had an interpreter I had my speech prepared because I knew this was where I could talk. I didn't get much opportunity to have the microphone, but court was where I'd get the microphone. And my interpreter, as I stood up and gave my speech in English, was gripping my hand. And then she gave it in Swedish with full emotion, and I gathered that. But my lawyer was completely not my Greenpeace lawyer. I had a public lawyer, and she just said, "Did you do what you did?" And I said, "Yes," because in Greenpeace you always say what you do. And she said, "Well, you're guilty, and I can't guarantee getting you out of here because you're under terrorist law," and so forth. So it was quite scary. I am a meditator, so I thought, well, I'm just going to use this as my cave. I had a meditation teacher once who lived in a cave for a year in India, and I thought of her, and I redesigned my cabin, my cell as a cave. And every time I was given a chance to have a shower, I'd keep a towel and I start to put towels down on the floor, do yoga, Tai Chi, every exercise I'd ever learned. And I meditated an awful lot. And I wasn't allowed to see anyone. There was nothing to read because the only thing they had in English was the Bible, which they finally found about day 5. I decided that I'd never read it, so I'd go ahead with it. But the jailer started to come to me. One guy came up one night and he said, "You like tea, don't you?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "You like milk in it, don't you?" Because they were only allowed to have milk once a day. And I said, "Yes." And he said, "I'll go and make you a cup of tea and put some milk in it for you." I said, "Oh, thank you so much. You left the door open." And I said, "You've left the door open." He said, "I'm not worried about you." So there was this kind of lovely thing that happened. At the end of the time, the head jailer came down to tell me that it was time to go. And I was so in my meditation mode at this time that I actually, as people walked in, I just kind of bowed to them like this because I was just there. And he took his, he stood at the door and he and he said, "I'm so sorry we have kept you here for so long." And I could feel that there was this change in the way. So it was this sort of little insight that as I lived the way I wanted, that I believed in living, it seemed to change things around me, if you understand. It was that kind of experience. So that's externally. You know, we had jailers putting money in, we had the police wishing us luck, we had jailers being kind and wishing the best for us. Internally, being in that place of absolute surrender, like I really was totally powerless. And it was this extraordinary sense as a white woman with a STEM background, a doctor, that suddenly none of that counted. None of it. I had zero power. Mm. It was, I kind of understood something that other people consistently experience their whole life, of all rights being taken away. It was a really kind of powerful insight into that, even if it was short term, except at the time I wasn't quite sure how long it was going to go on for. In fact, was told it could be indefinite, which was kind of scary. That I was anxious. And so there was this sense of, how was I going to survive this? How was I going to meet this? And I could feel the terror rising, and I just kept meditating. And as I meditated, the fear didn't go away, but I connected to something beyond it. And I won't say more about that in a public space, except connecting to that was beyond the fear sustains me in my most challenging moments. And that's what I mean by it being one of the most significant experiences of my life.